USS New Jersey is the most decorated battleship in the history of the United States Navy. It served across 4 major wars. It carried some of the most powerful naval guns ever built. And for decades, its name stood as a symbol of dominance at sea. Yet there is a truth rarely stated outright. USS New Jersey almost never decided the outcome of a war in the way it was designed to do. It was a ship born to duel equal opponents, a ship optimized to be the king of the surface. And yet, most of its combat life was spent escorting, supporting, and bombarding shore targets. So the question becomes unavoidable. If USS New Jersey was that powerful, why did it never become a decisive factor in war? This question does not diminish the ship's value. On the contrary, it is precisely because USS New Jersey was so exceptional that the question matters. Because history does not only remember what was strongest, history selects what best fits its time. USS New Jersey was launched during a unique moment of transition, when battleships still symbolized national power, but when aircraft carriers and naval aviation were already reshaping naval warfare. This ship did not fail. It served with distinction. It survived wars that many other ships did not. Yet that very longevity reveals a paradox. USS New Jersey was the pinnacle of an era, not the future of the one that followed. This video is not here to count how many shells it fired or how many operations it joined. That information is already well documented. This video exists to answer a harder question. What did USS New Jersey truly teach modern warfare? It taught that absolute power no longer guarantees control. A perfect weapon can be built for a war that has already changed. And victory does not necessarily mean you are moving in the right direction for the future. The story of USS New Jersey is not a story of failure. It is a story about transformation, a moment in warfare where even the strongest symbols must yield to new ways of fighting. And to understand those lessons, we must begin with what made USS New Jersey truly special. It was not an experimental ship. It was the fully realized peak of the battleship era. To understand the lesson USS New Jersey offers, one essential fact must be acknowledged first. This ship was not a product of compromise or improvisation. USS New Jersey, BB-62, was the result of decades of accumulated battleship design experience within the U.S. Navy. It was not an experiment. It was a complete synthesis of everything the battleship era had been striving for. USS New Jersey was designed to be faster, more powerful, and more flexible than the battleships that came before it. With a top speed sufficient to keep pace with carrier task forces, it shattered the assumption that battleships had to be slow and unwieldy. With its massive 16-inch guns, it preserved the battleship's symbolic role as the embodiment of overwhelming surface firepower. More importantly, New Jersey was not just impressive on paper. In practice, it was stable, reliable, and remarkably free of serious mechanical issues. Its large crew was tightly organized. Its command systems, radar, and fire control were integrated at a level considered advanced for its time. Based on these factors alone, USS New Jersey deserved to be called the ideal battleship. But it is precisely here that a critical detail begins to emerge. USS New Jersey was the pinnacle of battleship development, not the starting point of a new generation. It did not open a new path forward. It closed an old one in the most perfected way possible. In the history of technology, this pattern is not uncommon. Many systems reach their highest level of refinement at the exact moment when the environment around them begins to change. For USS New Jersey, that environment was modern naval warfare. By the time the ship entered service, aircraft had fundamentally altered how the oceans were controlled. There was no longer a need to close distance for gun duels. There was no longer a need for armor thick enough to absorb direct hits. Range, speed, and long-distance striking power became the decisive factors. USS New Jersey remained extremely powerful, but that power was no longer at the center of how wars were fought. The ship became a vital component of the fleet, but no longer the main character. It protected aircraft carriers rather than being protected so it could lead the battle. It supported operations rather than deciding their outcome on its own. This was not a failure of USS New Jersey. It was the unmistakable sign of a transition between eras. From that point on, the question was no longer, how powerful was USS New Jersey, but rather, what kind of war was it built for? And how had warfare itself changed? The answer to that question is the first lesson this ship leaves behind. USS New Jersey was born from a very clear assumption of 20th century naval warfare. That decisive battles would be fought between surface fleets, where big guns, thick armor, and the ability to absorb punishment would determine victory. For many decades, this was not a flawed assumption. During World War I and the interwar period, battleships truly stood at the center of naval power. Whoever possessed more powerful battleships was widely seen as the one who controlled the seas. USS New Jersey was the perfect product of that mindset. It was designed to fight head-on, gun duels against equal opponents, overwhelm the enemy through firepower and survivability, decide battles through concentrated brute force. If a classic naval battle between two battleship fleets had occurred, USS New Jersey would have been among the most terrifying ships on the ocean. But by the time the ship entered combat, the reality had already changed. World War II demonstrated that fleet gun battles were no longer the core of naval warfare. Aircraft launched from carriers could strike targets hundreds of kilometers away. Victory no longer depended on who had the bigger guns, but on who detected the enemy first and who could strike effectively from a distance. USS New Jersey did not become useless in this new environment, but it was no longer the weapon the war itself had been built around. Most of USS New Jersey's operational life was spent on missions such as escorting and protecting aircraft carriers, providing air defense for the fleet, bombarding shore targets in support of ground forces. These missions were critically important, but they were not the roles the ship had been designed to dominate. This leads to a sobering lesson about warfare. A weapon can be theoretically perfect, yet when the environment changes, its role must change with it. USS New Jersey did not fall short because it was weak. It fell out of sync because warfare moved faster than the assumptions behind its design. This pattern appears repeatedly in military history. Systems built on the lessons of the previous war often struggle to adapt to the realities of the next one. USS New Jersey adapted better than most battleships. It was fast enough to keep up with carrier groups. It was flexible enough to take on supporting roles. But the fundamental truth remained unchanged. It was no longer at the center of how naval wars were decided. The first lesson of USS New Jersey, therefore, is not about engineering, but about mindset. War does not wait for what you have perfected. It only rewards what fits the present moment. And sometimes, a weapon built too perfectly for the past must accept a more modest role in the future. Throughout much of military history, a simple assumption prevailed. Whoever possessed the stronger weapon held the initiative. The story of USS New Jersey shows that, from the mid-20th century onward, this relationship was no longer so straightforward. USS New Jersey carried guns capable of firing shells heavier than a truck, reaching targets dozens of kilometers away and delivering immense destructive power. In purely military terms, it was overwhelming force. Yet in real combat conditions, that power was not always permitted to be used. As warfare entered a more modern phase, each shot ceased to be merely a military decision. It became an action with political, diplomatic, and media consequences. The 16-inch guns of USS New Jersey could erase a target. But the question was no longer, can we fire? It became, should we fire? In conflicts after World War II, especially during the Korean War and the Vietnam War, USS New Jersey was often deployed in a long-range fire support role. Each bombardment mission had to follow strict rules of engagement, minimize collateral effects beyond military targets, account for political consequences after every action. The power was still there, but the authority to use that power was constrained by multiple layers of decision-making beyond the battlefield. This marked a fundamental shift from the era in which battleships were conceived. In classic naval warfare, the decision to open fire usually rested entirely with the on-scene commander. Whoever detected the enemy first and fired more accurately gained the advantage. For USS New Jersey, the context was different. The ship could be the most powerful fire platform in the region, yet still had to wait for authorization. And in many cases, that authorization never came. The lesson here is not about irrational restraint. It reflects a new reality of modern warfare. Military power no longer exists in isolation. War is no longer fought solely between armed forces. It unfolds before public opinion, before allies, and within the broader global political system. USS New Jersey stands as a clear illustration of that shift. A ship may possess superior power, but that power is only one element of a much larger equation. The second lesson is therefore unmistakable. Beyond a certain point, strength no longer automatically grants initiative. In modern warfare, initiative belongs to those who control decision-making, those who understand the consequences of action, and those who know when not to use all the power they possess. USS New Jersey did not lose its value because it was constrained. On the contrary, it demonstrates that warfare had entered an era in which restraint itself became a form of strategic capability. In military history, some weapons exist for more than combat alone. They also exist to represent something larger. USS New Jersey. BB-62 was such a symbol. It represented naval power, national prestige, and an era when steel and heavy guns ruled the oceans. But every symbol carries a cost. USS New Jersey was not just a ship. It was a massive system that required thousands of sailors to operate enormous amounts of fuel for each deployment, constant maintenance and modernization to avoid obsolescence. At its peak, sustaining a battleship like USS New Jersey consumed resources comparable to multiple other combat platforms combined. When warfare was still centered on direct, decisive engagements, that cost was considered justified. A single battleship could determine the fate of an entire fleet. But as warfare evolved, the cost-effectiveness equation began to surface. With the same time and resources, an aircraft carrier could deploy dozens of aircraft. Submarines could project deterrence across far wider areas. Aircraft could strike flexibly and continuously. USS New Jersey remained immensely powerful, but its power was no longer proportional to the resources required to sustain it. This is a crucial lesson in warfare, yet one often overlooked when discussing military icons. Modern war does not only ask, who is stronger? It also asks, who uses resources more efficiently? USS New Jersey became an expensive symbol, both in the positive sense and in the very literal one. Keeping the ship in service for decades was not purely a military decision. It also served as a deterrent message, a visible sign of commitment, a political instrument in a complex international environment. Yet this reveals a paradox. Symbolic value does not always align with direct tactical value. USS New Jersey was retained, not only because it was needed on the battlefield, but because it represented something beyond the battlefield. The lesson here is not to dismiss the role of symbols. It is to understand that the larger the symbol, the higher the cost of maintaining it, and the harder it becomes to replace or replicate. In war, As in many other fields, some things are preserved not because they are optimal, but because they stand for something greater. USS New Jersey is a clear testament to that reality. USS New Jersey was a success by every traditional measure of military history. It survived multiple wars, it fulfilled every mission assigned to it, and it became the most decorated battleship in the history of the United States Navy. Yet, this is precisely where a critical paradox appears. USS New Jersey did not give rise to a next generation. In military history, weapons that truly shape the future tend to share one common trait. They are copied, improved, and multiplied. Aircraft carriers led to modern carrier fleets. Jet aircraft ushered in a new era of military aviation. Nuclear submarines became the backbone of strategic deterrence. USS New Jersey did not. After the Iowa class, no new battleship class was ever built. No new doctrine placed battleships back at the center of naval warfare. This ship was a perfect endpoint, not a starting point. This did not happen because USS New Jersey was ineffective. On the contrary, it happened because warfare found more efficient ways to achieve the same objectives. Long-range firepower no longer required massive guns. Deterrence no longer depended on thick armor. Control of the seas no longer came from dominating the surface, but from controlling the space above and below it. USS New Jersey continued to serve, and was even reactivated multiple times. But with each return, its role grew narrower. It was no longer the center of the fleet. It became a supporting instrument for other platforms. This leads to a crucial lesson often overlooked when looking back at history. Success does not guarantee a future. You can do everything right in the present, but if the environment changes, what once was a strength can become a legacy. USS New Jersey did not fail in any conventional sense. It carried out its mission with distinction. But that mission belonged to an era that was drawing to a close. In the history of warfare, some weapons are remembered for opening the future. Others are remembered for closing the past with perfection. USS New Jersey belongs firmly in the latter. When USS New Jersey completed its final years of service and left active duty, it did not carry the feeling of failure. On the contrary, it left behind a record of achievement that very few warships in history can match. But if we look at USS New Jersey only as a list of victories and campaigns, we miss the most important thing it left behind. USS New Jersey, BB-62, does not teach us how to build a more powerful battleship. It teaches us how war changes faster than even the things we once believed to be permanent. It shows us that a weapon can reach the highest level of refinement, serve with distinction for decades, and still fail to become the foundation of the future. Not because it is weak, but because the world around it has changed. USS New Jersey stands as proof of an uncomfortable truth. In modern warfare, raw power is no longer the absolute center. Initiative does not come from firepower alone. It comes from adaptability, from efficient use of resources, and from understanding the limits of the power you possess. If USS Helena is a lesson about the cost of learning too slowly, then USS New Jersey is a lesson about reaching perfection just as an era is coming to an end. Neither ship failed, but both reveal that war does not favor what stands still, no matter how great it once was. Today, USS New Jersey rests quietly as a museum. No guns firing, no fleet formations. But its value does not lie in that silence. It lies in the questions it continues to ask of those who study history seriously. The question is not, how do we build something stronger? It is, how long will today's strongest thing remain relevant? Before we close, let me leave you with one open question. Do you see USS New Jersey as a symbol of enduring strength, or as the most dignified farewell of the battleship era? Thank you for taking the time to listen.